Do white people really have culture? Do they have culture? She said we should go back to seasoning our food. That's the best. But the question is, do white people do they really have culture? Because I'm confused. You know, a lot of them will come and make it look like, oh, you're copying everything from them. You're stealing everything from them. Everything that black people own today belongs to them. Every culture that black people practice belongs to them. But while in real sense, they are the one that is doing the opposite. But anyways, let's not talk too much. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Sonia. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. And credits belong to the original creators of every single clips and stitches we have in our today's episode. I want to say a very big thank you to every single one of you liking, commenting, sharing, dropping super thanks, and also joining my membership. I do not take you guys for granted. You guys are absolutely the best. With that being said, let's continue rolling out the clips. And I have a lot to say at the end of this video. Let's continue watching, guys.
Tell me how you define white identity and what you think is being erased about white identity.
Certain types of Anglo-derived culture that comes from our history.
Like what?
Let me think about this.
Cultural appropriation is the product of a society that prefers its culture cloaked in whiteness. Cultural appropriation is the product of a society that only respects culture cloaked in whiteness. Without that, if all culture were equally desired and respected, then imitations of other cultures would look just like that. Imitations. If all cultures were equally respected, then wearing a feather headdress to Coachella would just seem like a distasteful decision to get trashed in sacred artifacts. If all cultures were equally respected, then white kids with dreadlocks would look like middle-class white kids wearing the protests of poor blacks against the suppression, degradation, and oppression of white colonialists as costumes. Well, we don't live in a society that equally respects all cultures, which is why what would otherwise be seen as offensive and insensitive behavior is instead treated as a birthright of white Americans. And because we do not live in a society that equally respects all cultures, the people of marginalized cultures are still routinely discriminated against for the same cultural practices that white cultures are rewarded for adopting and adapting for the benefit of white people. What is white culture? This kind of reminds me of the story of Paul Whiteman, who was a composer back in the day, the early days of jazz. So we're talking about the 20s. He actually is known for wanting to redefine jazz. His whole thing was that the jazz that the black musicians were creating, he described as dirty and unsophisticated and untamed. Whereas what he was doing was he would describe it as refining a young lady, making the young lady proper. This was an art form that he was not responsible for creating, but he felt that he had the right to claim it for himself and for white people. And that's the kind of brazen, ignorant arrogance that this demographic has with regards to the one thing that they hold above Christianity, and that's race.
You could have Italians, you could have Irish, and those are in many ways more
Yeah, but
distinct.
you're worried about white culture. You're not worried about, you're now retreating to ethnic identity. You don't speak about ethnic identity. You speak about white identity. So tell me the values that stitch together white identity and that make it different than black identity.
I would say that the white church is very different than the black church in terms of its tone and style on average. Foodways could often be different.
The so-called white culture that this demographic wants to defend is vehemently race-obsessed and relies on appropriation and theft in order to claim things for themselves exclusively. I'll be frank, I think that there are some aspects of so-called white culture that need to be wiped out. When you really look at historically, the things that they have used to represent themselves, it is always at the expense and the ridicule of other groups of people. How many decades of Hollywood films do you have that actually demonstrate the mindset of the white American, from minstrel shows to blackface? These are people who are terrified to discuss their own history. So, I mean, how much of culture can you really appreciate when you don't even like looking at your history? Supremacy culture is an aspect of white culture that needs to be wiped out. And that's why I believe some of these people when they say that they're terrified that white people are getting wiped out. Whiteness is not a social construct more than it is a political construct used to manipulate society. It's not so much an ethnicity as much as, black people or Asian people, Latinos, or, any of those other groups that have a rich history. White folks have a rich history, but they don't like talking about it. And who would? Especially a group of people that are so desperate to pull history books out of schools, and they get bent out of shape whenever you talk about these things. It's a good question, though. What is white culture? What is it really?
I think you're struggling to answer this question, right? Because underlying your beliefs is a sentiment that white culture is just simply better.
Tell me what culture in America you think is so great?
The white culture.
White culture. Okay. That's crazy for you to say. Can you tell me what is this white culture that you think is so great?
White culture made America great.
Wait, tell me wait, tell me this white culture. What is this?
The culture that came from the UK, that came from France, the culture.
So tell me. I'm waiting. So wait, by the way, culture from other countries. So one, culture from other countries. Two, what are you going to bring up? Lack of seasoning on food? Tell me, what white culture do you think is so great?
We have stuff like Christmas.
Wait, was Jesus white?
No, I think
no. So if Jesus wasn't white and Christmas is about Jesus, then how can this be white culture?
It counts as white culture, though.
If Jesus isn't white, then how could specifically this be white culture?
Jesus didn't create Christmas, dude. What are you talking about?
It's literally about Jesus' birthday. Okay?
I know.
And Jesus isn't white. So it's in celebration of someone who's not white, yet you're referring to it as white culture?
What is white culture? I'm so glad you asked. And I want to be clear, we are talking about white American culture, not like what specific European ethnicities exist in their cultural practice. No. White, racialized American culture. There is a big difference. First, we got to look at how any culture is formed. It's not random. It's created through shared experiences, social interactions, and the passing down of knowledge and memories across generations. It evolves, it adapts, it helps people survive, find belonging, make meaning in a specific environment, especially under pressure. So now that we know that, when we talk about racialized cultures in America, because white is a race, let's look at Black American culture. A lot of that came out of survival after violent displacement, enslavement, and being cut off from ancestral lineage. Culture became both resistance and restoration, and a lot of what we attribute to Black culture is rooted in those themes of reclamation and resistance, okay, because of the history. Asian American culture is similar, had to balance preservation and forced assimilation because only certain groups were even allowed into the U.S., and they were often used to uphold white supremacy through the model minority myth, and many stereotypes and ways of being that are attributed to Asian American collective culture came about because of historical systemic oppression. Native American cultures are similar. They were targeted through erasure. That's genocide, boarding schools, banned ceremonies, stolen land. Indigenous cultures still survive in spite of U.S. colonization. Are we seeing a through line in racialized cultures? I want to add that everyone, technically, white folks included, have experienced forced assimilation to some degree. However, saying just that ignores the fact that that pressure came from the same system that I'm talking about, the white supremacist structure built by slave-owning, land-stealing colonizers. So when people say everyone assimilated, that what they're really saying is everyone was forced to conform to whiteness in order to survive. However, we have to acknowledge that only white people in the end, have been seen as white as a result of assimilation. Nobody else is viewed that way or enjoys the benefits in the same way. Important distinction. All right, so now that we got the foundation, what is white culture? Whiteness in America is not a culture rooted in struggle or displacement at the hands of other racialized groups. It is a system built on power and access. There are distinct ethnic cultures like Irish American, Italian American, German American, absolutely. Those are heritages, though, not the same as white racial collective identity. You cannot say Italian American culture is white culture because it flattens it and then erases how those same groups were once excluded and othered and then invited into whiteness so long as they upheld racial hierarchy. We saw that with Irish people also, we saw that with Jewish people also, etc. The truth is, whiteness as a racial category was engineered to create division, consolidate power, and maintain control. It works by absorbing some cultures and excluding others. And that shared experience, that collective white racial culture, is one of dominance and not mutual survival because of other races attacking it. So no, white culture is not like Black, Asian American, Native American cultures in the same way. And many people like to act like it's all equivalent, which we know isn't true when we look at history. You cannot say white culture was formed the same way as Black culture. Those cultures were shaped by resistance, and white American culture was shaped to erase that resistance. And when you're asking me what's white culture, the real answer is it's not at all what you have brought to the table. It's the system that told you that the table was already yours and you're trying to keep everybody away. And the only reason that this person even asked this question is because they're trying to argue that certain sports in the US today are examples of white cultural items, and that segregation, racism, and exclusion were just ways of gatekeeping those cultural aspects from non-white folks. And while it is true that the behaviors within those sports have mirrored white supremacist values like othering and excluding and dominating and controlling, it does not mean that the sports themselves are white culture. That is a misunderstanding of both history and power. And so many people who think like you call things like baseball American pastimes and equate that with white culture because deep down you only see white people as the real Americans, and that is racist and white supremacist logic. You conveniently ignore the history of forced segregation and racist policies and systemic efforts to exclude non-white people from participating in or being seen as part of the mainstream in society. That's how something like baseball becomes predominantly white in US history, not because of culture, but because of deliberate exclusion, colonialism, etc. And I want to be clear, white people did not even do the bulk of the labor at all in building this country. Enslaved people built the economy. Asian Americans built the railroads. Indigenous people stewarded this land long before genociding colonizers came through. So every piece of this country's foundation was laid by non-white hands while being shut out of recognition, opportunity, and representation. So no, sports are not some white cultural artifact. Sports reflect the larger society because they're part of society, and in the US, that means they reflect a society founded on white supremacy, colonization, and systemic exclusion. That's y'all's legacy. But that doesn't make them inherently white culture. That makes them a battleground like everything else in this country that was built on stolen land and stolen labor, and a nation that's always been multicultural, despite how hard whiteness has tried to erase that truth. Again, most of your argument is rooted in the fact that you and people who think like you believe white people, no matter where they come from, are the only real Americans. And that is your own internalized white supremacy showing. Until next time, y'all.
White people culture is pretending to not understand the difference between a personal bias and systemic racism. Racism is not just a personal feeling in your heart, right? It's a process by which systems, policies, actions, and attitudes create inequitable opportunities and outcomes for people based on race. And by now, we should all know this stuff, right? And if you don't know, it's because you've been neglecting yourself, right? Because think about it, like apps have to be updated. When you have a job, you have to maintain your credentials by learning all the newest stuff that comes out, right? All the latest developments in your field. And people's brains work in the same way too. So those of you who have neglected your brains don't get to change the meaning of words just because you don't like what they mean or what they might imply about you. What do I mean? Well, racism has a very specific definition. It's not just hating X people, right? If you hate X group of people, you have a bias, right? You're a bigot, sure. But you're missing the most important part of the definition, right? It has always been structural. People with zero hate in their heart can contribute to structural harms that have adverse effects on people of color. Now hear me, especially white people who generally have more power collectively, hear me, collectively as a whole in society. Everyone is capable of contributing to structural harms against a certain group of people, right? Say black people, right? Even black people can contribute to structural harms against black people. We do it all the time because our society is set up that way. Anyway, white culture is hearing me having said all that and then going, nah, I don't like what that lady professor said or how she said it. And man, am I sick of it.
All right, white culture real quick. There can't be white culture in this country, period. There's no white culture. And I think that offends white people because we are always talking about black culture and native culture. And then we get mad. We're like, well, we're a culture. No, we're a race. We're a race that took two other cultures, an entire African culture and an entire native culture, and we oppressed one and we tried to eradicate the other. But throughout all of our oppression and our murder and our rape, they never died. Their culture never died. They kept their religious practice. They kept their art, their fashion, their food, their music. No matter what we tried to do to the African culture that we brought here and the native culture that we stole from, they never died. And that drives white people crazy. So now we're desperate to have our own culture because we can't keep stealing from the ones that we've oppressed.
Things that are white culture that you didn't realize are white culture from an outsider observing. And I took notes using the phrase bottom of the totem pole. Racist. And you may wonder what, not racist, just horribly inaccurate. That is a colonial discoverer perspective on an art form of storytelling that was not hierarchical. Colonists came, saw the totem pole, they looked at the bottom as a hierarchical society and said, that must be the least important. No! That is either the beginning or the end of the story to someone's family, someone's history, a community's story. It is not better or less than. That is y'all motherfuckers putting hierarchy on a beautiful culture and society. So no, it does not mean the least priority or the least important from Indigenous perspective. Y'all projected that, and you need to know that. Mr. Brightside, I will say, it does sound pretty good once you've had a couple of teas. All right, casseroles? Casseroles are what I would consider, it didn't come from anywhere, but it began somewhere. And that has to, there must be some etymology. I think the closest I get is a shepherd's pie. Other than that, I feel like it's a very American thing. No one's brought me a casserole before, but that might be because I'm Canadian. I will try it. And I know there's variety, but hey, the more you know. Let me know if you want more.
I am saying this with like all the delicacy and respect in the world, but how does one stop being a white? Is the racial draft still a thing? And no, I am not talking about cultural appropriation and like, can I wear someone else's culture at Coachella? No, I have been out here dissecting white American culture for the past year and a half, okay? I have dissected it as a culture of domination and aggression, of patriarchy incarnate. It is privatized corporate capitalism as gospel. And the only gospel acceptable to whites is, again, one of domination. I've been out here dissecting this culture because there is nothing worth saving in this culture. And I say that both with a heavy heart and sharp-eyed realism. It's not that we like took a wrong turn at some point and we just have to get back, like the whole thing, bullshit. It is domination. It is colonization. That's it. That's all you get. Also, conformity and vilifying anyone and anything that is not that. And like, that is bad enough. Okay, that is bad enough. But point me to any sort of cultural contribution, it did not originate by whites. It was stolen by whites. Just like the only contribution is patriarchy. And like, I've been mad about this for a long time. Decades I've been mad about this. But I think something really broke in me watching Diljit Dosanjh on Jimmy Fallon. And if you don't know, you should look it up. It gave me this like very specific combination of like what happens to white girls when hip hop turns on at the party. That and that same kind of feeling I get when I see a tribal dance, when I see the haka. Something in me so deep, so ancient is screaming, where is my culture? Where are my people? What happened to my people? What did we believe? What unique, beautiful art and contribution did we bring to humanity? Where did we go? And I've also spent many years tracing that, which is part of my anger at Christianity and that kind of colonization. My people have been colonized for generations. My people, their culture has been brutalized out of them. And then later generations, my people bought the religious lies of the Mormons and they left everything to go join this ridiculous religion. And it's been nothing but disappearance and conformity ever since. And I've talked about this before. I talked about how the root of white supremacy, the hate for people of color and their culture, is rooted in the loss of white Americans having to conform in order to survive. And we don't have anything. We don't have anything that is ours, that is authentically ours, our people's. And that soul level loss is so big, but so unnamed. But I truly believe it is at the heart of why white people cannot cope with people of color speaking their language, performing their art, embodying their culture. Because we sacrificed ours to survive. Why did you get to keep yours? And I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not justifying it, but I'm saying it's there and it's unexamined. The lie of supremacy is that if you climb that heap and you perform that role and you have that domination, you have that control, that success, that you will be happy, that that's the American dream. But it is a lie. We have nothing but domination and loss and patriarchy and capitalism. And I know I see a lot of people out here wringing their hands about how do we save democracy, and I'm out here saying maybe we don't. Maybe we don't save anything about America right now. Maybe we all collectively admit the American dream was always a lie from day one. The American dream is colonization and conquering. Let's let that dream die. And then let's come back to the table and create something that we've never had before. An authentic culture, an actual melting pot of true equality, of actual liberty and justice for all.
On today's edition with Lady Bedazzled Hannah, I will be answering your question, what is white culture?
Hi, my name is Dr. Cruz. I study race and pop culture, and you have my attention.
The wording of white culture is a broad term that I use that umbrellas the many diversities within us white skin-toned people.
So the first thing to get into here is that racial identities, in this case whiteness, function in a few different ways, and one way in which they operate is to structure reality through language. In this case, the structure of reality that is being championed is this argument that if you have a particular complexion, then you share a cultural commonality, and that includes across national borders. The first major problem we encounter here is whether or not we can even agree on what constitutes the complexion of whiteness, because the truth is the people that we consider to be white come in a variety of shades and colors. Take me, for example. I consider myself a person of color. I consider myself brown because that has been my lived experience. That's how I've been identified by other people. That's how I see myself. And depending on where I've been identified as a variety of nationalities and ethnic groups that we associate with being brown, such as Middle Eastern, Pacific Islander, Native American, or Latin American. And yet I also know that depending on who's looking at me, I can pass as white. So from the premise alone, we can see that there are some severe foundational flaws to this argument because it can be difficult to even agree as who counts as white. Now, this creator also says that there's a lot of diversity within the group that we refer to as white skin tone people, and there is some degree of truth to that, but we're going to get into that later.
And I think the same can be said of other ethnicities because with brown culture, red culture, yellow culture, black culture, as well as white culture, we need a foundation that builds into all that we really are on every level.
So there are a few things in this part that we need to take a look at. The first is that this creator is using race and ethnicity interchangeably, and that is just not accurate. A race is a category that is based off of perceived physical qualities, whereas ethnicity is about identification with a group that has a shared culture and way of life. And that can include things like norms, traditions, rituals, that kind of thing. And heritage, ancestry, genetics, and even race can be components of that, but they are not the same thing by any means. Now, in regard to the supposed racial cultural groups, there's a few things to unpack here, so let's take a look at each of them. So for one, there's no such thing as a brown culture. Now, there is a thing called the brown commons, but that's more about social structures and power and the cultures that get pushed to the margins, not a unified brown culture. Regarding red culture, to the best of my knowledge, that's not a thing either. Now, there is some evidence that early Native Americans in their legal dealings with colonial forces identified themselves in contracts in terms of red versus white, but that was about identifying two different parties, not about asserting that there was a common cultural group or racial identity among them. In terms of yellow culture, in the 1960s and 70s during the civil rights movement, there were some Asian American groups that used the slogan yellow power as a part of their protest, but that's about the closest I've ever heard to the phrase yellow culture. Now, black culture does exist, but even that comes with a heavy qualifier of being context dependent, because black culture in the United States is different from black culture in other countries. And even in the United States, it's different based on a variety of factors such as region. It is also a very context-dependent social response to the African diaspora, and in particular, the transatlantic slave trade. Now, regarding that last part about a racial identity that is foundational and encapsulates everything, it's worth noting that when it comes to white racial identity, it does operate that way, but not quite in the way that you're thinking. Rather than encompassing all these different, unique ethnicities and nationalities and all that kind of stuff, white racial identity takes from a variety of identities and cultural groups and then strips those norms, practices, beliefs, what have you, from the original context and then repackages them in a way that is mainstream commodifiable, usually in service of capitalism.
It can get really complicated because we get into all the factors of nationalities, countries, ethnicities, cultures, and races, but not one person is just one background. So this is where it's really interesting and fascinating.
So this actually gets so close but still misses the point. So it's a basic understanding of cultural studies and intercultural communication that we all belong to a variety of cultural groups, and this informs our ethnic identities and our other identities for that matter. But the idea of elevating a white racial identity to this sort of foundational culture that encompasses everything then takes all of that beautiful complexity and nuance and detail and then boils it down into something that's very simple, that's very reductive, and honestly often operates like a blunt instrument in castigating other people.
So to me, white culture is industrialism, cultivation, intelligence, cleanliness, order, generosity, and so much more.
All of those ideas exist in other cultures to various degrees, but the idea of acknowledging the different manifestations, their validity, and the relationships that different culture groups have with those ideas is a complexity that is incompatible with white racial ideology.
Check out my ethnic background. Don't forget some things don't show up in the test results.
I do not have enough time right now to explain why connecting race to biology is a problem.
Good and evil exist in all cultures.
Also, the sky is blue. So here's the thing. Does white culture exist? No, it does not. That is a centuries-old talking point that has been used and recycled by white supremacists of every shade and variety, and most recently by white nationalists. Now, am I saying that that content creator is a white nationalist or white supremacist of any sort? I am not. I don't know them well enough to make that assessment. What I'm saying, though, is that if you hear that kind of language, if you hear that kind of ideology, there's a really good chance you are in a white nationalist environment. However, while white culture doesn't exist, I would argue that white American culture does, because we have people that identify themselves as white Americans who have cultural ways of life. But even that requires heavy qualification because it's context dependent. You have to consider things like region or specific state. You have to consider education level, economic status, and a variety of other factors that inform the ways in which a person goes about living their life in what is a cultural routine or normative way. And you can acknowledge that. In fact, I would suggest that you should, so that you can better understand the racial power dynamics within the United States, while still rejecting this idea of an international white culture or a white culture in the United States that is monolithic, because that is a fabrication without merit.
Growing up in Utah until 2005 fifth grade and then moving to Atlanta was really confusing for me. as a white person growing up in white supremacy and the Mormon Church. Now, the most confusing part of that is going to Atlanta, and I'm in elementary school, I'm in middle school, and there's these, they're talking about white people have no culture. What is white culture? And I'm like, as a kid, just like thinking like, well, have you been to Utah? We don't talk about this there. It's because everyone has the same culture and everyone does the same stuff. We don't talk about what white culture is. And the only thing that's really helped me, try and understand some of the things that were so confusing in Atlanta is White Woman Whisperer. And her recent post on her Patreon, if you're not following her on Patreon, please go follow her. White Women, I'm speaking to you. And talking about how white women need to talk about their culture more. And I just think it's so interesting. We don't talk about that. Why? Because we don't have any. And I was told that in elementary school, middle school, by my fellow black students. And I was so offended by it. So offended, have you not been to Utah? The only place, I lived in Washington before that, Washington State, but I don't remember much. And from what I do remember, we were in the Mormon community there too, so there wasn't a whole lot of diversity. So yeah, white people, what is our culture? Because I remember in middle school, they'd be talking and they'd be like, your only culture is ranch and mayo. And I was so offended by that. So offended, because I don't even like ranch and mayo. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
All right, buckle up. We're about to cover the 15 traits of white supremacy culture. Not the hood and tiki torches version, the everyday version that sneaks into your workplace like a raccoon entering a Chipotle dumpster. Because we're all swimming in white supremacy culture, whether we want to, believe in it, or even know it's happening like an iPhone update in the background. Number 1, perfectionism. Ah, yes. The belief that making a single mistake means you must pack your belongings and move into the woods to think about what you've done. 2, sense of urgency. Everything must be done now, immediately, yesterday. The world will collapse if Brenda doesn't get that email. 3, defensiveness. Someone says, hey, this could be better, and suddenly people are acting like you just stabbed their childhood. 4, quantity over quality. Did you make 12 mediocre things today? Congrats, you're crushing it. Meanwhile, your soul left the building hours ago. 5, worship of the written word. Because if it wasn't documented in a 36-page Google Doc, how could it possibly be true? Or real, or exist? 6, only one right way. My way. Why? Because that's how I do it. Why ask questions? Stop resisting. 7, paternalism. When people in power say, we made this decision for everyone else because we know what's best. Which is funny because they never do. 8, either or thinking. Everything is either good or bad, right or wrong, hero or villain. Like a Marvel movie written by somebody who hates nuance. 9, power hoarding. We totally believe in collaboration. Hides all important information in a vault protected by lasers and emotional manipulation. 10, fear of open conflict. The moment someone expresses an honest emotion. Okay, that was aggressive. No, Susan, it's just Tuesday. 11, individualism. The belief that everyone should be on an island. Alone. Self-sufficient, self-soothing, self-destructing. Community? Never met her. 12, objectivity. Pretending you don't have emotions, while clearly having emotions. Lots of them. All of them. All the time. 13, right to comfort. Any hint of discomfort and someone is like, I'm being attacked! Meanwhile, you're literally just talking. 14, progress equals bigger, more. We're expanding! Cool, why? Because expansion is progress? Or maybe we're just tired of spiraling. Ever thought of that? 15, entitlement to leadership. When people assume they should be in charge because they've always been in charge, despite demonstrating no actual leadership skills. At all. You don't have to be racist to swim in this culture. You just have to be alive. These are the default settings. The goal isn't guilt, it's new norms. We need to shift from control to collaboration, from urgency to sustainability, from hierarchy to shared power, from comfort to accountability. That's when real liberation begins, and that's when all of us start breathing easier.
Anyways, welcome back and thank you so much for watching. Yes, white people do have culture, but it is important to understand that white is a racial category, not a single culture. There is no one unified white culture in the world. Instead, there are many different cultures connected to Europeans, ethnic groups, languages, histories, religion, food, music, traditions, and national identity. It simply means they still do not have culture. For example, the Ireland have Irish culture, the Italy have Italian culture, Germany have the German culture, Russia have the Russian culture, France have the French culture, Poland has the Polish culture, and Greece has the Greek culture. Each of these culture is different from the others. Some examples of the European cultural traditions include classic music, traditions from Austria and Germany. We have the Renaissance Act from Italy. We have folk dance and storytelling tradition across Eastern Europe. We have food like pasta, bread making, cheese, sausage, pastries, and regional cuisines. We have language such as English, French, Spanish, German, Russian, Greeks, and many others. Religious traditions connected to Christianity, Judaism, and local folks belief, festival architecture, clothes styling, literature, and philosophy. The confuse often come from the fact that in places like United States, white become a broad racial identity that grouped many European ethnicity together over time. Irish, Italians, Jewish, Slavs, and others were not always seen as equal. White in American history, our generation made distinct European identity blend into a broader white American identity. Some people argue that white culture in America feels less visible because European immigrants groups gradually assimilate into mainstream society. Many traditions become normalized as the default culture. American culture itself become heavily mixed with influence from many groups, especially Black Americans, indigenous people, Latinos, Asians, and Europeans. Much of mainstream's American music, slangs, fashion, dance, and entertainment has been strongly shaped by the United States Black Americans culture, while other parts from came from the European tradition. It is also important to separate race to physical and social classification and culture from for languages, traditions, values, food, music, history, religion, and custom. So, at the same time, people sometimes use the phrase white people have no culture as a criticism of assimilation, colonialism, history, or modern consumers' culture, not literally statements that European created nothing culture. European has contributed anonymously to world literature, science, architecture, philosophy, music, and political system. That's the only thing they are good at doing now. Just as African, Asians, and the Middle East, indigenous civilization, and the Americans have shaped the human civilization. As far as I'm concerned, even if they lie, they should tell me, they should keep reminding me. I say, white people do not have culture. That's just the honest truth. I don't see anything culture. See, culture is something that is deep that people should understand. Go and get the definition of culture. You will understand that most of the things that every single one of us are enjoying, even those of us from Africa, we are literally enjoying what Black Americans' effort has contributed into our life. We are literally enjoying the struggles of Black Americans and what Black Americans have been able to do. So it's as simple as that. As far as they don't have culture. Yes, they don't have. Anyways, let me know what you think in the comment section. If you think they have culture, I want to also know. And if you're a white person watching, please let us know what are the cultures that you have. If you think maybe I'm over exaggerating it or I am lying, let us know in the comment section as well. Credit to the original creators of every single clips and stitches we have in our today's episode. I want to say a very big thank you to every single one of you liking, commenting, sharing, dropping super thanks, and also joining my membership. I do not take you guys for granted. You guys are absolutely the best. And yes, guys, with that being said, with no further ado, I do like I always say in my videos, I'm going to be saying bye, and I'll see you guys in my next one. For now, bye guys. I love you guys. Mwah.